My ex-wife, Jean, is 40 years old while I am 41. We first crossed paths when we were both 21. By the time we reached 26, we were working on the same farm, and that was when we started dating. After 2 years together, we tied the knot, and 3 years into our marriage, we welcomed 2 sons, now 10 and 9 years old. The second pregnancy came as a surprise, and Jean was not thrilled about it. However, she chose to go through with it even though I made it clear that I would support whatever decision she felt was right for her. The last thing I wanted was to pressure her into anything she was not comfortable with. Life after our first son's birth was good. We were deeply in love, doing our best as parents and partners. But everything shifted after the second pregnancy. Jean's mood took a sharp turn. She became short-tempered and would snap at me or our eldest son over the smallest things. At first, I chalked it up to hormones and figured it would pass, so I tried my best to be patient. But instead of getting better, things only went downhill. My son and I learned to walk on eggshells around her, carefully navigating our home to avoid setting her off. I took on all the household responsibilities even though she was meant to be the one managing them. After our first child was born, Jean decided to leave her job and focus on being a stay-at-home mother while I worked to support us. That arrangement seemed fine until her second pregnancy. That was when she started saying she was too exhausted to handle both the house and the kids, so we ended up hiring a housekeeper. It was not exactly within our budget since I was not making much at the time, but I agreed because I did not want her to struggle, especially while pregnant. I assumed that once the baby arrived, she would resume taking care of the house and our children, but things did not go as I had expected. I want to make it clear, I was never the kind of husband who just sat back and did nothing after coming home from work. No matter how exhausted I was, I always made an effort to help out around the house. When Jean gave birth to our youngest son, I figured that after a few months of recovery, things would settle down and we would get back to normal. But as time passed, nothing changed. Jean remained just as irritable and completely unwilling to lift a finger around the house. Instead, she spent her days glued to the televisions. She did not even take them out to play on the rare occasion that she did. It was only because she had paid a housekeeper to take them to the park. I do not want to sound resentful, but it hurt. I was working long hours, sometimes day and night, yet she was not even doing the bare minimum to keep the household running. Hiring a housekeeper to handle all the cleaning and other chores was draining our finances fast. On top of that, I still had to cover our regular expenses and wanted to set aside savings for our son's future. But with Jean refusing to contribute in any way, saving money felt nearly impossible. By the time 6 months had passed since our youngest son's birth, I knew I could not keep going like this. Something had to change. I braced myself for a difficult conversation and arranged for my parents to watch the boys for the day. Once we were alone, I sat Jean down and tried to reason with her. I told her I understood that 2 pregnancies had taken a toll on her, but I needed her help. Keeping a full-time housekeeper was too expensive, and I asked her to at least handle some of the household chores so we could renegotiate the housekeeper's contract, reduce her hours, and save some money. She insisted that taking care of the kids left her too busy to do anything else and that instead of complaining, I should just figure out how to make more money. She accused me of blaming her for our financial struggles when, according to her, the real issue was that I was not earning enough. I tried to explain that I was already doing everything I could, but if our marriage was going to work, she needed to put in some effort too. I also brought up something the housekeeper had told me, that Jean was not really taking care of the kids and was just letting them sit around watching mindless reality shows. That turned out to be a huge mistake. Jean immediately blew up, accusing me of spying on her through the housekeeper. She started quarrel, yelling that she was done being pressured into doing all the work while I supposedly did nothing but sit at my desk all day. Then she went on to say that if I could not afford a housekeeper, that was my problem, not hers, and that as the man of the house, it was shameful for me to even ask for her help. None of it made sense. She was grasping at anything she could to justify her behavior and make me seem unreasonable for expecting her to contribute in some way. Things spiraled from there, turning into a full-blown fight. At one point, she called me a loser who could not afford a woman like her. That was the last straw for me. I snapped back, calling her a lazy cow who had already failed as a mother. Our oldest son was afraid of her, and now she was failing as a wife too. My words must have cut deep because Jean lashed out, shoving me with enough force that I lost my balance and crashed into the coffee table. The glass shattered beneath me and I ended up with cuts and bruises along my back. The pain was sharp, and the moment I hit the floor, Jean's anger dissolved into panic. She started crying, apologizing over and over as she helped me up. I was rushed to the hospital, and thankfully the injuries were only superficial. But that moment changed everything. I realized I could have been seriously hurt, and worse, I could no longer trust her. If she lost control like that with me, who was to say she would not do the same with our sons? I was not willing to take that risk. I told her she had to move out, at least for the time being, because I could not trust her around the kids. Until she was out of the house, I asked my parents to take care of them. For a week, Jean fought me on it. She pleaded, swearing it would never happen again, but I just could not take that chance. I almost went straight to filing for divorce, but she begged me to reconsider, to give her a chance to fix things. In the end, we came to an agreement. She would move in with her parents and start therapy. Only if a professional determined she was stable and healthy would I consider letting her come home. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. People who were genuinely happy do not behave the way she did. But at least she was willing to seek help, and I wanted to believe she could get better. I also did not want our sons to grow up without their mother, so I agreed to put the divorce on hold and give our marriage one last shot. During our time apart, we also started seeing a family therapist together, hoping it would help us work through our issues. But in the end, none of it mattered because Jean betrayed me. I will explain exactly how that happened. While Jean lived with her parents, my own parents moved in with me to help care for our sons. We were seeing a marriage counselor regularly, and for a while it actually seemed like we were making progress. I also kept in contact with her therapist, who diagnosed her with postpartum depression and assured me she was improving. One of her symptoms, it turned out, was aggressive outbursts, something she had not recognized in herself until she pushed me. That incident had been a wake-up call for both of us. This continued for almost a year. About 6 months in, I even allowed her to start visiting the kids again, always under my supervision. Gradually, she seemed to be returning to the person she used to be. I felt hopeful for the first time in a long while. Then, out of nowhere, things took a turn. Jean stopped attending our counseling sessions without any explanation. She also stopped replying to my messages, even though her therapist assured me she was still making progress. None of it made sense. I spent weeks trying to reach her, to get her to talk to me, but every time I brought it up, she brushed me off, saying she just needed some space. For nearly 3 months, Jean kept avoiding me, dodging my calls and skipping our therapy sessions. At first, I respected her space, but as time dragged on, it became clear that something was off. I had not gone to her parents' house before because they had never liked me. In their eyes, I was the reason Jean had changed. She even asked me not to visit, saying it would only stir up more unnecessary drama, and we had already had enough of that. But I could not ignore the feeling in my gut any longer. She was slipping away, growing more distant with each passing day, and I had no idea why. Even when she did show up to therapy, she seemed disinterested, like she was just going through the motions. Anytime I asked her about it, whether in person, over the phone, or even through text, she would insist that everything was fine. But I knew she was hiding something. That afternoon, I finally decided to break my own rule and show up at her parents' house unannounced. I expected to find her there, maybe get some answers, but instead I was met with a cold reception. Jean was nowhere to be seen. When I asked her parents where she was, they just glared at me and said they could not tell me. Then, without another word, they slammed the door in my face. Something about the way they did it sent a chill through me. They seemed almost smug about it, like they were enjoying shutting me out. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach, and right then, I just knew something was very wrong. I stood on their porch and tried calling Jean, but she did not answer. I called again. And again. Nothing. With each unanswered call, my paranoia grew. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to take a walk around the house. I knew their routine well enough to remember that they usually left the kitchen door open. But as it turned out, I did not need to sneak inside. Because there she was, sitting on the backyard swing, completely oblivious to me. And she was not alone. Jean was wrapped up in the arms of another man, kissing him like nothing else in the world mattered. It has been years since that moment, but I can still see it as clearly as if it happened yesterday. My heart stopped. My blood went cold. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The guy, whoever he was, jerked back the second he saw me. Jean turned around just as I started walking away, but I did not wait for her to say anything. I was already heading straight for my car. She ran after me, calling my name, trying to stop me. But I could not hear her. Not really. It was like I was in a daze, my mind completely shutting down. When she grabbed my arm, I snapped out of it just enough to push her away. I told her not to touch me, climbed into my car, and drove off. The moment I got home, I blocked her everywhere. No explanations, no second chances. I did not want to hear whatever excuse she would come up with. She had already said enough. That night, I sat my parents down and told them everything. I told them I wanted a lawyer, immediately. Jean was out of my life and I was going to make sure she stayed that way. I did not see her or hear a single word from her until we had to meet with a mediator to discuss the terms of the divorce. By then, I had become completely numb. I was like a machine, just going through the motions of life for my sons. Emotionally, I was hollowed out. Even when I found out Jean was giving up her parental rights, I felt nothing. She had made her choice. She did not want to be a mother anymore. She wanted to be with the man I had caught her with. Let's call him Sean. Turns out he was an old childhood friend of hers. They had lost touch after high school, but when she moved back in with her parents, they reconnected. And apparently she fell in love with him. Her parents fully supported her decision. In fact, they had been rooting for this all along. They always wanted Jean to end up with Sean, and now that she had finally chosen happiness, they were thrilled. Never mind that she was married. Never mind that she had children. To them, none of that mattered. The divorce was brutal. Even though she was the one who cheated, she still had the audacity to demand alimony. It was absurd, but it was real. She wanted to walk away with money she had done nothing to earn. But my lawyer and I fought tooth and nail to make sure she got nothing. And in the end, we won. I had spent years providing for her while she sat at home, doing nothing but watching television. There was no way I was going to let her take anything more from me. It took 5 long years to finally put all of that behind me. The months following the divorce were some of the hardest of my life, but I had no choice but to push through. My sons needed me. I was the only parent they had left. Thankfully, I was not alone. My parents were my rock, stepping in to help whenever I needed them. I never repay them for everything they did, but I will always be grateful. Now, 5 years later, I can finally say that life is good. At the time, the divorce felt like the worst thing that could have happened to me. But looking back, I realized it was the best thing that ever happened. Without Jean dragging me down, everything changed for the better. I worked hard, climbed up in my career, and eventually I was able to move my sons into a bigger house. Money is no longer an issue because I am no longer supporting someone who refuses to contribute. My parents live nearby, stopping by often to visit. I have good friends who care about me. And my sons? They are happy. That is all a man really needs. I thought I had finally closed that chapter of my life for good. But a few days ago, Jean showed up again. And just like that, everything changed. The kids were at school, and I was about to leave for work when the doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a moment before opening it. And there she was, Jean, standing on my doorstep, with a little boy at her side. He could not have been more than 3 or 4 years old, and the moment I laid eyes on him, I knew. He was her son. I stood there, frozen, barely able to process what was happening. But before I could even find the words to ask why she was there, Jean burst into tears. She said she had come to apologize, to make things right. She told me she was ready, finally ready, to reconnect with us, to be part of our family again, to give our marriage another chance. I just stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. After all these years, she thought she could just show up, say a few words, and expect everything to go back to the way it was? As if she had any right to decide that on her own? Something inside me snapped. I looked her in the eye and told her that we were no longer her family. She lost me the day she cheated with Sean. The divorce was just a legal formality. And as for our sons, she was the one who gave them up. She had no right to call us her family now. And then, without another word, I slammed the door in her face. I could have said worse. I could have cursed her out, could have screamed at her for daring to come back after abandoning us. But I did not, because of the little boy. Through the door, I could hear Jean crying. She did not leave right away. She stood there for a few minutes, sobbing, hoping I would open the door again. I did not. I waited until everything went quiet, then left for work like nothing had happened. I refused to let myself think about it too much because I knew that if I did, I might hesitate, and I could not afford that. Now, a few days have passed and I have thought about it a lot. And even after all that thinking, I still do not believe I was wrong. Some people might say I was cruel, that I should have given her a second chance. But she did not deserve one. So, does that make me a bad person? A selfish man for refusing to let my ex-wife back into my life? I do not think so. It has been about a week since Jean showed up at my door with her son, and in that time I have uncovered a truth so disgusting that I still cannot fully wrap my head around it. The level of betrayal I have suffered is beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Turns out my parents had been in contact with Jean all along. Not only that, but they were the ones who gave her my new address. After the divorce, I cut off all ties with her, but they never did. They held onto this ridiculous belief that one day she would change her mind and come back. So, they kept in touch sporadically, maybe once a month, but that was more than enough for me to feel completely betrayed. And that was just the beginning. When Jean was served with divorce papers, Sean gave her an ultimatum: either she walked away from our family and started a new life with him, or she stayed in her children's lives, but that meant losing him. There was no in-between. She had to choose. And she chose him. According to my parents, it was not an easy decision for her, but in the end, she decided to start over with Sean rather than stay and fight for the family she already had. But here's where things get even worse. Shortly after I filed for divorce, Jean reached out to my parents. She told them she was cornered by me, by Sean, trapped in a situation where no matter what she did, she would lose. If she tried to fight for custody, I would push for full parental rights, limiting her to supervised visits at best. And Sean? He wanted her to give up the children entirely. She knew she was facing an uphill battle. With her history of aggression and the circumstances of our divorce, she had little to no chance of winning custody. And if she tried, she risked losing Sean too. To her, it was a waste of time and resources. So, my parents stepped in. They met with her in secret, listened to her sob story, and agreed to help. Since she had signed away her parental rights, she could not see the children legally, but my parents still could. And they used that against me. For years, they deceived me, secretly allowing Jean to visit our sons behind my back. They justified it by saying that they could not bear to keep a mother from her children. But betraying their own son? That did not seem to bother them at all. Every time I left my kids at their house, they invited Jean over. They manipulated my sons into keeping quiet, bribing them with toys and sweets. And when I asked my kids what they did at Grandma and Grandpa's house, they lied because they were told to. They told me they were playing with their friend. I assumed they meant an actual friend of my parents, someone I knew. But no. My parents had instructed my sons to call Jean a friend in case I ever asked. I was stunned. I could not believe my own sons had lied to me. But I forgave them. Because this was not their fault. They were children, easily manipulated, easily scared. And Jean, along with my parents, had instilled such fear in them that when I finally asked if they had been seeing their mother, they broke down in tears. They told me they could not tell me. Because God would punish them. That is how far Jean and my parents went to ensure their silence. They manipulated them, intimidated them, made them believe there would be dire consequences if they ever told me the truth. And I felt like a fool. Not just because they had gone behind my back, but because I had never even thought to ask which friends my sons were spending time with. It could have been anyone. Someone far worse than Jean. And I would have been completely unaware. But now it is over. I have already filed for a restraining order against Jean and against my own parents. And I have proof. A few days after our confrontation, my parents sent me a letter. A pathetic, self-righteous letter explaining their actions. They thought it would make me understand Jean's struggle, make me forgive them for everything. All it did was solidify my decision to cut them out of my life for good. The irony in all this? Jean gave up her own children just so she could stay with Sean. She was forced to meet them in secret like it was some kind of crime because Sean did not want her to have any connection to her past life. And yet, in the end, even he abandoned her. The man she sacrificed everything for, the love of her life, he left. They had a son together, but according to my parents, Sean wanted nothing to do with her or the child. He got a job offer in another city and walked away, leaving her with nothing. Everything she threw away, her marriage, her children, her entire past, it was all for nothing. And now? Now she is standing at my doorstep, thinking she can just walk back into our lives. But I am not that man anymore. I will never let her hurt us again.